Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Emperor's Concubine, Chapter 6. I'm excited to share with you what will happen today with Lionel and Genevieve, and I hope that you have been enjoying the story. First of all, I just wanted to send a shout out to all of my fans, followers, subscribers, listeners. Thank you for the outpouring message of comfort and hope in the loss of my mother in law. I will be flying into Minnesota tomorrow afternoon for her funeral. If you are local, please grace us with your presence as we honor her for one final time. The funeral will be held at Legacy on East River Road in Fridley. Thank you so much for your support.
This town is quiet when it's late here. This town is quiet when the night is getting close. I'm outside, gonna stay here. I'm outside until you tell me to stop. I'm being so dramatic. I'm always being so dramatic. This town is quiet when it's late here. This town is quiet.
The bag holding Paloma's head was tossed onto the ground before Lionel's feet, and he stared at the blood soaking through the fabric. He shut his eyes and let out a breath, trying to control the loud humming of his pain from beneath the thump of his chest. He'd watched the executioner strike his sword and saw how her head had rolled off her body and how her shoulders shook violently before it fell over. When her head came to a pulse, her eyes were opened, and it seemed to be staring at him with a record of their union. He'd had to look away, and even now, just staring at the bag in front of him, haunted him. "Burn it," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty." The servant grabbed it and walked out as Genevieve entered, her eyes full of questions as she walked to where he sat. He reached out a hand to her, and she took it as he led her to come sit where he was. "I plan to make a ceremony to induct you as Empress." She looked away from him. "I came into this palace as a concubine, and now I am being inducted as an Empress. I never expected to execute my own, but history has changed. I will go down as the first one to do so." She touched his cheek. "You have loved her with all of your heart. Somewhere inside of you there's an ache that can't be filled, even by me." "Of course not, my lady. I never expected to be betrayed by her this way. No matter what status I am, I shall be the first emperor in history to do so, and I have never lied nor asked her to pretend. I have only expected honesty, and the same applies to you." Nodding, she replied, "I understand." "The full moon is in a fortnight. I shall arrange for a proper welcoming for you then as Empress. I am sure you would like River present. That would give her enough time for her to come here." "I appreciate it."
"Warrior."
Genevieve jerked awake in her bed, in the quietness of her chamber, as she reached for the blanket around her. The voice was again at the foot of her bed, and she saw the shadow that rose, standing first 4 feet, then 5, then 6, and finally 8 feet tall before her. Her heart constricted, and she was breathing hard.
"Warrior."
The voice whispered.
"Blood from the innocence of lives do not make men rulers. It is a price paid that the strong demand of the weak. Look. Look at what they made your people do in order to gain control."
And the images began as a blur before her, before it got clearer and clearer. Again, war and blood, villages being burned one after another, the screams that echoed throughout haunted her. Genevieve covered her ears and began breathing hard.
"Warrior, your people have suffered enough wrath for centuries. Control your heart and give your people the peace they have desired. You must control your heart and not give in to the Emperor's love. Control yourself."
Genevieve felt her body shake, and she gasped for breath. She saw the shadow lower itself back into the form of a black orb, and it disappeared into the wall. She screamed, an echo from her lips, causing Camilla to come running into her room with a candle. "My lady, are you all right?" she asked as she set the candle down and took her hands. "You are shivering. You must be coming down with a fever. Let me get the fire started and I'll go fetch His Majesty." No, Genevieve whispered through chattering teeth. I'll be fine. Camilla started the fire, and as it burned and warmth began filling the room, she came to hold her hand and brushed her hair away from her face. Do not alert the Emperor, she whispered. I'll be okay. But, my lady, you are with fever. If anything happens to you, I will be at fault. Please, let me fetch the Emperor. The shivers that came stopped her from responding, and her body broke into a convulsion of shakes so violent that she fell off the bed. Camilla took off screaming for help as Genevieve gasped for breath. The black shadow was in the corner of the room, smiling at her with fangs, and then suddenly it began crawling toward her. It formed a head, a body, and long black hair. Shoulders began emerging, and a tongue began wagging. It was then that Genevieve realized she was looking at herself, and as she brought her hands to protect herself, the shadow jumped into her body, causing her veins to tighten, and she felt her vision blur.
Warrior, now we are as one. Use the anger to avenge your people. You are now ready to fulfill your duty.
Gasping, Genevieve let out a blood-curdling scream as Lionel entered the chamber. Genevieve! He ran to her and picked her up, yelling at the heat that came from her and dropping her instantly. He shouted for a doctor to be fetched and threw a blanket into the bucket of water beside him, finally wrapping her body with a wet blanket. Genevieve, look at me, he cried. Her eyes bulged, and she gasped for breath as his face came into view. She screamed as his hands touched her, and images of blood came into her mind. And then she saw his great-grandfather behead all of her people, one by one. Some, as small as an infant, whose body was thrown against a rock. Brains, blood, splattered all over the ground. Genevieve screamed and her body went still as she curled her hands into fists, a dying promise to avenge lingering on her lips.
This town is quiet when it's late here. This town is quiet when the night is getting close. I'm outside, gonna stay here. I'm outside until you tell me to stop. I'm being so dramatic. I'm always being so dramatic. This town is quiet when it's late here. This town is quiet. Sadness, I can see the moon. I know that I'll be fine here. Things get complicated, but I know we'll be alright.
Your Majesty, Easton said as he entered the Emperor's study, Lady Genevieve is awake. She is being attended by the servants. Lionel nodded and rubbed his head, exhaustion filling over his mind. Good. Has anyone gone to fetch your mother? Yes, word has been sent, and an envoy has been dispatched. She should be arriving tomorrow evening. Lionel sighed and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with his hands. Easton, what do you think happened? The Empress was beheaded, and suddenly Lady Genevieve experiences something so evil like this. Was it my doing? Your Majesty, you cannot put the blame on yourself. The Empress was at fault for committing a crime to take life. Until we know what is wrong with Lady Genevieve, do not believe it is at your own doing. Lionel let out a deep breath. My ancestors have always been a bloody history written in books. We have never had much peace, and when I took over the throne, I knew their actions would follow me to my reign. I cannot control what they did, but I feel as if I am being punished for what they did accomplish. Every emperor has that thought in mind, Your Majesty, but you are loved by your people. Your hand will be seen by the heavens as righteous. Lionel laughed. You want merits by words, don't you? Smiling, Easton replied, My purpose is to rid the thoughts of doubt in your mind, Your Majesty. Well, you have succeeded. Lionel entered the chamber where Genevieve slept, and Camilla stood, quietly leaving the two of them together. He noticed the small slashes of cuts on her hands, and reached out to touch a wound when her voice alerted him. "What are you doing?" He stopped and looked up at her. "Have you rested enough? How are you feeling?" She pulled her hand away from his hold and sat up, her eyes carrying a glare he didn't recognize. "I am well, Your Majesty. My health is not of your concern. I shall mend my own heart back together. You should focus on the rise and fall of your people." Lionel frowned and crossed his arms. "The rise and fall of my people? Are they not your people as well?" She smiled and looked at him with a sideways glance. "My people are the Hayam Hulan tribe. They do not harm innocent people." "As the same with me." "But your history is written with blood. You said so yourself." Lionel's eyes narrowed, and he dropped his arms, trying to figure out how she'd heard his words. He walked closer to her and leaned down, taking in the strange look she gave him. "What is going on with you, Lady Genevieve? Have I wronged you in some way I do not know my own fault?" Smiling, she replied, "You have wronged me in many ways, Emperor, but I promise you that debt will be paid off soon. You need not worry about anything. Enjoy your peace." "Is that a threat?" he asked, anger filling him. "No," she answered sternly. "It's a promise." "I don't believe I have done anything wrong to you." "That's just it, Emperor. You have done nothing. You always have done nothing. But in time, you shall see that those who do nothing in the eyes of murder and deceit will receive the same token of mishap put upon them." "You speak in riddles, and you can't seem to solve it." "Do not worry, Your Majesty. I shall reveal the truth in due time. You just focus on holding your own throne." Lionel cocked his head, and a smirk appeared on his face. "I have allowed you to live and say as you pleased. I have even executed my own empress." "And am I the one at fault for that decision? Did I ask you to behead her? You saw yourself that she was ready to poison me, and the choice came from your own lips." "Enough!" he shouted. "This talk is over and done with. You will become the empress and rule with me. Your Hayam Hulan tribe will be forgotten, and you will learn to love my people as much as you did yours." Her eyes turned dark, and a smile appeared as she shrugged her shoulders lightly. "Very well. You have shown me what I needed to see. This loyal subject abides your orders, Emperor." "Have you decided?" River asked as she brushed Genevieve's hair, wetting the comb with jasmine water and letting the scent fall onto the strands. It had taken longer than she anticipated to arrive at the palace, but she was here, and the battle was about to begin. She had been feeling the earth's vibration for a while, and she knew the blood moon was going to appear soon. "Yes," Genevieve replied, "I have decided, and I was due as my ancestors have asked. For far too long I have failed everyone, and this time I shall not." Smiling, River replied, "Good. Love simply robs you blind." Genevieve turned to her and asked, "You speak so well of love being blinded. I have never asked you why you remained without a partner. If I am going to start a war, will you share with me your story?" River smiled, and then she sat down, her eyes becoming misty with the remembrance of her past. Who wouldn't want a partner in life? To have one is to be able to live life without worry, without concern. But to love is to be weak. And I was weak once in my life, but I shall never succumb to that again. "Tell me," Genevieve urged. River's eyes filled with tears, and she lowered her head. "Yes, there was a man I loved. Once, a long time ago." "Was it Lionel's great-grandfather?" Nodding, Genevieve replied, "Yes. The immortal blood in me has kept me remembering all these centuries while he rots beneath the dirt." "What did he do to you?" Looking up, she replied, "What did Lionel do to you?" Genevieve didn't answer, and River smiled, almost a cackle coming from her lips. "He was the greatest man who took my heart, And to this day, I don't think I ever really got it back. I was in this haze where I believed I could still make him change his mind. A man whose thirst was in blood of others, weaker than him, and I was so blinded by love that I gave my entire heart and soul to him. She got up and walked to the balcony where the fresh air blew through her white strands. He was a great warrior, standing in the field with a sword twice the size of his arm, and no one would dare match his strength. When he stood in the battlegrounds, it would rain for days, the earth feeling the pain as much as the mortals. And there I was, a concubine in his palace. Genevieve stood up, shocked as she walked to her. You were his concubine? You've lived in these walls before. Nodding, River replied, Yes, I have lived here in these very walls. They keep secrets of the past, and when I am here, I can hear every single whisper I spoke to them decades ago, as a young and innocent woman. When the night fell and he came to do his husband duties, and I didn't want him to leave. Yet he left me to find another warm body. When the morning sun rose and he was sleeping next to me with a nightmare, and I asked to be his freedom. When he robbed my heart and walked away without looking back. When he drank my blood and left me to die. Oh yes, my darling Genevieve, I have been inside these palace walls. She reached out and took River's hand. Why didn't you tell me? River looked up at her with sad eyes. The timing had to be right. And you had to have been given a glance into the past. Don't fail me this time, Genevieve. My sufferance has been long awaiting. I need the blood of Lionel to end this curse, and so do you. Once you have drawn his blood and drank from it, only then can our immortality be cured, and can we finally take revenge for the death of our people. Do not fail me. Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 7 will be released soon.
This town is quiet when it's late here. This town is quiet when the night is getting close. I'm outside, gonna stay here. I'm outside until you tell me to stop. I'm being so dramatic. I'm always being so dramatic. This town is quiet.